Sure thing.
Yes. You can start. Ahona, it's to you now.
Am I audible?
Yes.
So good evening, everyone. Today our guest who will be interacting with us is a spider expert, and he is Mr. Samuel John. He is the co-founder of Spiders and the Sea, a social enterprise working towards bridging people and nature through research, outreach, and creative storytelling. As an intelligent researcher, he is interested in spider behavior and natural history. When he's not photographing spiders or writing about them, he can be seen playing the blues for them. He regularly daydreams of using a calculator, a pencil, and a cup of sambar to unravel the secrets of the universe. He will be walking us into the amazing world of spiders. So, sir, we welcome you, and the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that generous introduction. I think the first important thing I'd like to share is that I'm not a spider expert. I'm just very intrigued by them. So yeah, we quickly jump on to start sharing my presentation and we can kick things off. Can everybody see my slideshow okay?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Yes, sir.
Super. There we go. So, well, welcome to the amazing world of spiders. And it's also very nice of people to spend their Sunday evenings listening to a guy talking about spiders. It shows you that the world is moving in the right direction. So, before we get started off, I know Shilpa and I had a conversation about how you guys are from diverse backgrounds and that we'd minimize the technicality. So I was immediately tempted to make the first thing I talk about very technical, naturally. But so when we talk about spiders, we all tend to have a whole bunch of views. So as promised, the first thing that we talk about is the technical aspect. We look at some of the things that make a spider, right? Like what makes, when you look at something, how do you know it's a spider? Well, for one, they have these mouth parts that are called chelicerae. It's what spiders eat with. These are the, if you can see the fuzzy little things right in front of the face over here, the arrows pointing to, that's what they use to chomp down on their prey. Also, their venom is delivered through these mouth parts. Another very popularly known thing about spiders is that, well, they have 8 legs, which is a feature of arachnids, which is a nice group of individuals. And not all, but most spiders have 8 eyes. So if you're wondering why I'm starting with some of these boring details, it's just to sort of set context to understanding where spiders came from. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about over millions and millions of years of evolution. But how many millions of years? Well, the earliest evidence we have for something that looks like a spider was 390 million years ago. It's a dizzyingly large number. And it was this fossil that was found, and for the longest time they thought this was the oldest spider. And well, they named it Attocoppus, which is the old English word for spider. But then there was a bit of an argument saying, hey, but is this really a spider? Because yes, it has the chelicerae that we were talking about just now, the mouth parts. I know this is a very, it's not a great drawing, I'm sorry, but this was the only one I could find on Creative Commons license. But if you see the picture here, you can see those two sort of beige stubs coming out of that creature's face. Those are the chelicerae that we're talking about. And as you can see, the 8 legs are also there. So most people assumed that this was a spider, but we weren't quite there yet, right? So at 305 million years ago, we got the first almost spider. So this was another fossil that was found. It looks very much like the spiders that we see today. It had the chelicerae, it had the abdomen and the cephalothorax, which is the sort of head and thorax of the spider fused together. So there was still one thing that was sort of missing in that whole puzzle, which showed up about 300 million years ago. And those are spinnerets. So if all of us are familiar with spiders today, one of the most popular thoughts that we have about spiders are the webs that they weave. And these webs primarily are made by this organ. And it's a spinneret. When it's right at the back of the abdomen, right at the tip, that's what makes a spider a spider. So a spider needs to have its 8 legs. That makes it an arachnid. It has those mouth parts called chelicerae that put it in a group called chelicerata. And then when it has spinnerets that allow it to weave silk that it can then use as a web, it can use as a slingshot. Some of them use them as sort of anchorage when they're jumping from point to point. That's what makes a spider a spider. But one thing that I struggle with is when people talk to me in terms of millions of years, it becomes a little difficult, right? Like, how do you fathom a million years? So let's try and go stage by stage. So this is a tiny little chart of a couple of monumental occasions. If we're at today, the chart is absolutely flat. If we go about 20 years ago to the turn of the millennium, still doesn't look like a lot of time has passed. Then we go to a time when I don't think most of us remember a time before this, but this was the first smartphone ever, about 28 years ago. And then by the time you reach the invention of the internet, which to most of us will seem like, time when the dinosaurs were walking around, it still hasn't put a dent in that chart if you look at it. Hardly any time has passed. And then you're talking about independent India, which is, possibly our grandparents' most formidable years. And even that doesn't seem to put a dent when you look at how much time has passed since the Indus Valley civilization, one of the earliest human civilizations out there, right? So when you look at this time scale, you get a sort of idea of what even 8,000 years looks like compared to some of the things that feel like an entire lifetime for us. But then you stop and compare the Indus Valley civilization here, if you can see it. So again, a tiny little speck. It's the fourth one from the top. That's what 8,000 years looks like in the larger scheme of things. When you think about when the human genus first evolved, it was about 2.8 million years ago, right? So again, ridiculous amounts of time. But you start to get a sense of how much time has really passed. If you look at the civilization, the first civilization versus, some of our entire lifetime, there's a significant amount of time that's gone by. But then let's take it really, really, really far back to something that most of us assume is the first few things to have existed on the earth. Most people I talk to, when I tell them, hey, can you think of like really old life on earth? Dinosaurs come to mind. But here's an interesting little visualization of timelines, right? By the time you go back to like the first land animal that came about 434 million years ago, the human genus again starts looking like a speck. Everything to do with modern civilization is just sort of flatlined here. And what's interesting is when you think of prehistoric creatures like dinosaurs that came in about 230 million years ago, it's interesting to see that the first spider came about 300 million years ago. So spiders were there long before the dinosaurs, and considering there's probably one in your bathroom right now, they've been here long after the dinosaurs as well. But if you, like me, also are not a fan of bar charts and it's still not doing the trick for you, here's a little time machine to sort of put things in perspective, right? So let's assume this time machine works in a way where we drive a certain distance and that distance is through time. And every kilometer we pass is a year. So if we had to drive back to the Indus Valley civilization in this little time machine, we'd have to drive from Bangalore all the way to London, which I can imagine won't be easy on the back. But if you had to go see the first Homo sapiens, the first sort of modern human, you would have to drive almost to the moon. It's a bit short from the moon itself. I like to call this the chai shop on the way to the moon, but that's how far you'd have to drive. And then you stop and realize that if you had to drive back through time to see the first spider weaving an orb web, you'd have to drive all the way to the sun. Of course, it's not to scale, but you sort of get the magnitude of how old spiders are here on Earth, and how extremely recent we are. And it sort of puts things into perspective when you look at them and, well, try to understand that they've been here for so long and they figured out some stuff that we look at in the later stages of this little presentation. So they've been around for nearly 300 million years, right? So in all of that time, they've also had time to spread. So this is a rough estimation of what the global distribution of spiders looks like, right? In terms of, well, where they're found at least. And as you can see, they're literally on every continent. Even in the Arctic, there are spiders. As you can see, this little red line on the northern Arctic region. But, well, how did they get there, right? Like, imagine a tiny little spider spreading so far and wide. Of course, continents have shifted, land masses have moved, all sorts of stuff has happened. Humans have also become very interesting, well, proponents of allowing things to distribute from one landmass to another. But they have some nifty sort of tricks up their own sleeve. So one thing that spiders do, which I personally find extremely fascinating, is when they're little babies, when they've just hatched, and here you can see a bunch of tiny little spiderlings that have just hatched, they do something quite remarkable. They go on to a slightly high point like this, maybe a leaf, maybe literally anything. I've seen them do it off a TT table as well. And what they'll do is they'll start releasing this thin line of silk. If you remember the spinnerets from where the silk comes out, they'll start releasing that silk, until suddenly the spider just takes off, right? And that is something that spiders do, and it's called ballooning. So in ballooning, the spider is basically riding the wind, and they can fly for many kilometers and at ridiculous heights. I think the highest recorded ballooning spider was 1.7 kilometers in the air. A pilot basically called it in and said, "Yeah, there's a spider on my window." And it's interesting because this was a phenomena that was first described by Charles Darwin. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. He's a slightly famous guy in the sciences. So when Darwin was sitting on the famous beagle and sort of thinking about life, he was about 100 kilometers off the nearest island. And he suddenly started to notice these tiny little things sort of floating in the air and landing on the boat. And they were all spiders. So he was in fact the first one to sort of talk about ballooning. And most people since then thought the spiders are just sort of, riding the wind and using drag basically. What they found out in Bristol University over 9 years of, well, looking at the spider's butt is that they're not just using the drag in the wind, but they're also using the changes in electrical charge in the air itself. And because of their silk also carrying some amount of charge, in a way, they're actually riding the electricity in the air, which I think is very, very cool. So they've spread far and wide. They've done these really cool things like ballooning all over the world and, sort of crawling everywhere. So how far and wide are they spread? So we look at a couple of interesting examples from the most extreme situations, right? So this is the Himalayan jumping spider. It is the highest known living resident in the world. I think it lives they've been found as high as 6,700 meters above sea level. So very close to, like, very close to the top of Everest. A very cool spider in that it's able to survive in that habitat where hardly any other forms of life survive. They hunt whatever small flies come for the moisture somewhere in those mountains, and they're a testimony to spiders being able to sort of really rough out harsh weathers. And then you have the Arctic wolf spider. So this is a spider that lives in the Arctic region. So it has to deal with a whole bunch of ice. And then you have, when you sort of come all the way down from the icy shelves and the tops of mountains, this is a spider called the intertidal spider. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the intertidal zone, If you guys are all based out of Pune and ever go to Bombay and do an intertidal walk, an intertidal zone is where the sea meets the land. But what happens interestingly is that because of a tidal shift during low tide, that part, the intertidal zone, is completely dry. All of the water goes out, and it's a completely terrestrial habitat. And then after about 6 hours and 15 minutes, when the tide rushes back in, it's a fully aquatic environment, and it's completely submerged by water. This is a spider that has evolved to live in the intertidal zones of some parts of the world. So what they do, interestingly, is during low tide, they come out and they hunt for small crustaceans or insects that are sort of hovering about. And as the tide comes in, they'll go into a rock crevice, like the one you see here, even like small bits of coral that are lying here and there. They'll find a crevice, crawl into it, and pull a piece of kelp to seal the hole, creating a small air pocket in which they can sort of sit and rest for about 6.5 hours before they come out and hunt again. And they don't just sort of wait inside the hole. So there are some spiders, like the Argyroneta aquatica or the diving bell spider, that does some really cool stuff. Basically, this spider goes scuba diving. What the spider does is, if you can see these hair on its legs, it has similar hair on its abdomen as well. So the spider will dive into the water and it will trap air around its abdomen. And what that basically does is it gives the spider a small little scuba tank to breathe from. So it gets its oxygen supply from here. The spider will keep doing this a couple of times, and it will even build a small little bubble of water, a bubble of air underwater. If there's some vegetation around, it will go keep depositing air into that vegetation and form a small little. So spiders build things called retreats. That's where they sort of hang out and like to chill out and eat and stuff like that. So it makes these little retreats underwater, and once the retreat is set up, the spider goes for a little hunt, catches something in the water, and very happily sits in its retreat and chomps down on it. So yeah, again, not many things will be looking for a spider underwater. So this is an evolutionary trait that allows it to operate in a completely different sort of ecological setup, where not too many predators may be thinking of eating a spider, and not too much prey will be thinking about being too scared of a spider. And they sort of capitalize on that. And even closer to home, all along the Western Ghats, this was a fishing spider that used to live behind where I used to work. Yeah, there are spiders that go fishing. Like, they just sort of sit around on the stream all day, and I can relate to this. They sort of sit around by the stream all the day, with their front legs sort of dipped into the water, waiting for something to go by. And in addition to sort of being in these extreme sort of places like the Himalayas and the Arctic and sort of these extreme regions, well, they're also found in your homes, right? This is a crab spider that was inside of a flower in my mother-in-law's garden. And so they're very remarkable creatures that are highly adaptable, and you'll find them literally everywhere. So the other good thing about being into spiders, unlike other things, is that you don't have to travel too far and pay for an expensive safari to go, look at a few cool things. You'll find them quite literally everywhere. Even in arid regions where the wind is extremely gusty, it's really hot during the day, really cold during the night, they'll find themselves a burrow and sort of just relax inside. So their evolution and their abilities to adapt haven't been limited to just sort of adapting to the place around them. They've also gone as far as adapting to some of the other stuff that lives around them. So here, this is a Myrmirachne. So this is a genus of jumping spider that has evolved over time to mimic ants, to look like ants and to behave like ants. So if you look at the top left picture here, that is an ant. And if you look at the top right picture here, that is a spider, and they were literally on the same gate. In fact, it's beneficial for the spider to be close to these ants, because that is the entire sort of idea behind the strategy. So in general, in nature, a lot of things tend to be a little wary of ants. Ants have strength in numbers. They're extremely formidable when they all come together, and they can deliver a nasty bite. They're full of formic acid, which makes them not so palatable for a lot of things that generally don't enjoy the taste of formic acid. And what the spiders figured out is that, hey, maybe if I look like that ant, things will leave me alone. So if you look at the picture below, it's the same spider, but here you can see in more closer view that it has those big puppy dog eyes that you'd see on a jumping spider. But it's also being very clever about it. It knows that, well, as a spider, it has 8 legs, but ants tend to have only 3 legs and 2 antennae. So what the spider will do is it'll actually pick up its front 2 legs, like you can see in this picture, and pretend like they're antennae. So their ability to mimic isn't limited to just looking like an ant. This is a genus of spider found in the Andamans. It's called Cosmophasis. And this particular species within that Cosmophasis genus actually is a chemical mimic of the weaver ant. So what it does is it goes and steals larvae of the ant and basically chomps down on the larvae. And ants, especially sort of complex social structures like weaver ants, heavily depend on chemical signals to communicate. It's how they know that another ant, especially another weaver ant, is from the same colony. So it's sort of like this, chemical identity card, and that's how ants, especially weaver ants, recognize each other, know that you're from the same colony, you're not from the same colony. Well, you're an ant, you're not an ant. This spider seems to have figured that out. It goes into their colony, steals larvae, and once it eats that larvae, it's able to sort of take on the pheromones or the chemical signature of the larvae itself. So as far as the ants are concerned, they really can't detect that there's an outside presence here, because all they're getting is the chemical signature of a larvae. Of course, the spider doesn't go a little too close and tempt the ants too much, but this form of chemical trickery is enough for the spider to sort of access the weaver ant nests, steal their food, steal more larvae. They've also been found to go into weaver ant nests and start their own little nest and have their own little babies under the protection of weaver ants. And in addition to sort of, well, these external adaptations, right, like mimicking ants and sort of adapting to harsh conditions, they've also got some interesting sort of, through evolution, they've gained some very interesting things like intelligence. Of course, my general thought is that every spider that you'd see, every species is equally intelligent in how it's sort of understanding its environment and applying, everything that it's learning towards living a pretty incredible, short but pretty incredible predatory lifestyle. But one particular species that's been heavily studied, specifically with the theme of its intelligence in mind, is a spider called Portia. So Portia is a genus of spider within the jumping spider family that particularly enjoys eating other spiders. So it has preference of going and hunting other spiders. So imagine, we've just seen that spiders are fairly well adapted, really smart, they're very good predators and all of that. So how do you outdo an already amazing predator? So Portia has sort of like blown people away, because if you look at this spider, it's so tiny that the entire spider is probably the size of your thumbnail. Which, when you then put into some perspective, its entire central nervous system will fit on the head of a pin. And this tiny little thing has been they've documented the spider using things like trial and error. It'll try a strategy to hunt a certain spider. If it doesn't work out, it'll come back, it'll make a course correction and then try again. And it learns over time, right? If you see this picture here on the left, there Portia has managed to catch a spider that was on its web. Now, why would a spider that's sitting comfortably on its web in its stronghold climb down? So Portia, being very, very, very smart, decides to use the spider strength against it. So most web building spiders, they sense the world around them through vibrations. So anything that vibrates the web, they'll know if it's um, anything from prey to maybe a predator or a guy with a camera getting a little too close. They tend to know these things and they'll take actions accordingly. If they know it's something that can put their life in danger, they're going to run and hide in their retreat. If they know that it's food, then they'll quickly move towards the food to go inject it with venom and subdue it. So Portia, knowing this, tends to go to the edge of some of these webs and she'll sort of slowly pluck them using her legs, a combination of different legs. And she also uses some of her mouth parts. So while she's doing all of these little sort of vibratory movements on the web, she'll keep watching the spider that's on the web to see if it makes a move. And she'll keep changing the pattern. She'll hit it with her pedipalps a little, she'll hit it with her legs, and she'll use different combinations and sort of permutations until that spider decides to climb down. And well, when the spider climbs down, Portia is at an advantage. And she'll quickly pick the spider off the web and, well, as you can see here, make a quick meal out of it. So again, they're everywhere, they're doing all of these amazing things. But how do they really fit in, right? So one of their biggest roles, one of the spider's biggest ecological roles, is that they are the biggest predators of invertebrates. So they will happily chomp anything from this was a fly that was unfortunate enough to think it could get away with, we're feeding on my Dabur honey bottle, and then lo and behold, a jumping spider showed up. Now this little centipede that another jumper managed to catch in my bathroom. And it's not just the larger idea of controlling insect populations with the ecological need of it, right? Like if you think about it for a second, that's what it's one of the things, one of the many things in this larger ecosystem that keeps the whole thing in balance. Population control across different types of living forms. Being a little more selfish as a human, another thing that they do is, because they also feed on insects like mosquitoes, they can have a decent amount of impact on reducing the amount of disease spread amongst humans themselves. And again, they do this across a wide variety of habitats, across a wide variety of prey types. And it's not just them eating other insects, right? So they're also food for a lot of things. In this particular case, it's a little more gruesome than the food itself. So here, if you can see on the right, that's a wasp, and that is dragging away this much larger huntsman spider. What happens is the wasp will come and it'll inject a bit of venom into the spider, paralyzing it, and then it will drag the spider's paralyzed body into a little nook, maybe a gap between two rocks or a small burrow. It will throw the spider in there, and then it will sort of put its babies inside the spider. And well, when they hatch, they have food to eat. It's pretty gruesome, but it's the circle of life. And like you can see here, contrary to what this may look like, the ants are not giving the spider a sports massage. They're about to sort of take it apart and feed an entire colony with it. So their role goes both as predator as well as prey for many, many things out there in the world. And well, if they run out of things to eat, spiders are also known to sort of very happily eat another spider. As you can see here, there's a jumping spider that's jumped into a web onto the leaf that was sort of caught up in the web and is chomping up on the owner of the web itself. And here on the sides, you have all of the tiny little babies that are sort of just going about their business, kind of like they understand the circle of life. If you'll allow me to be philosophical on an otherwise fairly gruesome image. So yeah, so we've looked at a whole bunch of things, right? So one more thing that I like to look at, and personally, what are the lessons we can learn from spiders, or just what are the different perspectives we can take. One of my favorite examples is sort of the gender dynamics that exists in spiders. So in almost all cases of web building spiders, the female is much larger than the male. And in most species of spiders, especially the web building ones, the ones you're likely to encounter sitting on a web are the females. The males generally wander about, mate, and then sort of go about their way, not really being seen. And this is particularly sort of well exemplified in the case of the golden orb weaver. So if you can see this giant yellow spider here that's occupying most of your screen, that's the female. If you can see the small little red blotch over here, that's the male. So in fact, when I was taking these pictures, the male was sort of trying to get closer to the spider and say, hey, can we mate? And the spider was busy finishing a bee that she had just caught, and so she was clearly not in the mood. So she would just kick him in the face using one of these hind legs. That's probably about 7-8 times the size of this guy. And the male would actually retreat in fear, because if he did enough to, well, upset the female, she could very easily turn around and make a meal of him too. So he waits patiently, and then finally, when she gives the okay, that's when he climbs down to mate. And I think consent is a wonderful lesson we can all learn from spiders. So in addition to that, right, like that's more of a pragmatic sort of, well, it's just something that I like to take away from looking at things in nature and seeing how, well, we can improve on ourselves a little bit. But outside of that, in terms of its direct, some of the lessons we've directly learned from spiders are, well, the golden orb weaver is a very good example. Its silk is one of the strongest known natural fibers in the world. So it's at the heart of a lot of research across a variety of applications. So you have people working on using silk proteins and putting them in goats and then extracting milk from the goat and synthesizing that protein to make bulletproof vests. Mind blown. But you also have these things being used for medical purposes. There are a lot of now applications where they're trying to use spider silk. They're trying to see if spider silk could be a good way of sort of helping with tissue regeneration. And well, of course, I don't have a medical background, but for those of you from the medical sciences here, I urge you to go look at some very interesting work that's being done on looking at spider silk for a variety of medical uses, from tissue regeneration to well, administration of certain antibiotics for open wounds and stuff like that. They also have antibacterial properties, which is why they're so popular. In fact, if we look at the sort of medical uses of spider webs, it dates back quite a long time ago, and again, very similar to its antibacterial role. Both Roman soldiers as well as indigenous folks in Australia have all spoken about using spider silk as an anticoagulant. So every time they had a wound or a cut and there was some spider silk lying around somewhere on a web, they were impolite enough to kick the spider off, grab some of that silk, and actually patch up their wounds. And that's supposed to have helped. So I don't know if that inspiration is borrowed from there. But when we start to talk about some of these ideas of, well, humans taking ideas from spiders, or like, finding real life applications for, well, whatever they're doing, the biomechanics and the silk and everything, you start to wonder, okay, this can't be new, right? Like, how long have spiders and humans been interacting, and what is that interaction meant through time? Especially because when you consider today, there's a lot of negative connotation that's sort of associated with spiders. Most of us have, I mean, including me before I really got into this stuff, I don't know if I was terrified, but I was fairly indifferent. I was like, spiders, so what? But has it always been like that, right? Because, I mean, I know I felt like that because I grew up in a city. fairly disconnected from, well, most ideas of nature that you now have. And so then I started to ask myself, like, have we always been disconnected from spiders? Have humans who have been here for like 2.8 million years and spiders that have been here for 300 odd million years, I'm sure at some point they met each other and like had an interesting conversation somewhere. And turns out, if you look at some of the older examples, there are most sort of folklore that came out of the sort of indigenous tribes of North America, very old tales. A lot of stories from the indigenous tribes of Australia all speak of the spider as the one who wove the cosmos in place. As this creature that wove the sky into its place and put the stars there and everything else. Even closer to home, in the Andaman Islands, there's a group of tribes that form the Great Andamanese tribes. Across many of their tribes, there was a goddess named Bilika, and Bilika was the goddess of the sky. Same thing, she wove the sky in place, and then she came to rest on earth. And while she was here, she was, she gave people a bunch of rules and said, don't do these things. Of course, they went and did them. And then she got really angry and she tore the sky open and she lashed down with rain and thunder and all of those things. What's also interesting is that in the same language of the Great Andamanese tribes, Belika is also the word for the golden orb weaver, which is this spider, right? And there's also an interesting correlation there in that the general time that they associate Belika getting angry and lashing down on them with rain and thunder is when the northeast monsoon typically hits the Andaman Islands. So it's a bit of sort of, ecological knowledge and just ideas about climate and weather that's nestled into a nice little story. So again, still in a very positive light, you're looking at spiders as these sort of goddesses and creators of the universe. Even closer to home, you have ideas of, if you read a book called the Periya Purana, which I've read for some reason, there's a lovely story in there about how there was a spider and an elephant in the middle of the forest, and they would go to worship Lord Shiva. And while they went there every day, there were leaves falling onto the deity. And the spider got really upset that the leaves are falling and sort of making the place messy. So the spider built a nice web over the little, I think it was a Shiva Lingam, and it built that web to prevent leaves from falling down. But the elephant, who generally didn't like the idea of cobwebs, ripped the cobweb and threw it away and everything else. And well, the spider got angry, they got into a fight and they ended up killing each other. But Lord Shiva was so touched by this whole move by the spider that he decided to reincarnate him as a Chola king. So if you look at actual literature, there was a Chola king called King Kochengan who held that in his previous life he was this spider. So even as recent as that, as the 12th century, I think, is when the Purana, that Periya Purana was compiled. In places like India, there was a very positive association with spiders. People are looking at them as, cool things that lived around. If you look at old Greek literature, there's the story of Arachne being this master weaver who outwove the gods, and that's why she was cursed to be a spider. But it still spoke of spiders as, really good weavers, as creators of art that was to be sort of revered. Even in the Proto-Dravidian word for spider is sali, which is interesting because after that came many weaving communities in India that have different forms of the word shali associated with them. One example are the Padmashalis, who hold that, they are expert weavers who wove clothes to the gods using lotus fiber and all of that. But again, the root of that word again comes from spiders. So throughout history, they've sort of, across geographies, they seem to have had a very positive sort of, people viewed them in a very good light. There was coexistence. But interestingly enough, when I dug up a little more of very old Anglo-Saxon literature and stuff from the medieval times centered in Europe, there's a lot of negativity that starts to show up. Spiders are looked at as sort of the sickly things that ensnare. Um, the idea of a spider web is associated with fragility and things that can just break easily. The entire concept of a web to catch things was associated with evil and ensnaring. And if you remember in our first slide, we were looking at that thing that spiders are most likely descended from, the Attocoppus. That was the actual old English word for spiders at that time, around the medieval time when people spoke much funnier English than we know today. And what's interesting is the word Attocoppus, when broken down, means poison head. So the general association was that spiders are these venomous things that can kill you. And a lot of the literature from around that time seems to point in the direction that spiders are extremely dangerous and that they can kill you, which is quite intriguing because there are no venomous spiders around those parts. There are a few that can have sort of harmful effects on you in terms of venom. And they're in Australia and some in South America and a few in North America. But I was just reading an interesting statistic. Between 2001 and 2013, 7 people have died as a result of spiders. I also read somewhere else that literally cows are more fatal than spiders, just from annual number of people who die statistics. Not too sure about that, but it's a fun assignment for you guys to look up on a Sunday evening. So then, where did it all sort of change, right? Like, so I mean, if we're all being honest, none of us are very excited about the idea of a spider. In fact, you then start to realize that most of our popular media about spiders starts to look like this. These are actual movie posters. As much as I would have liked to come up with things that are this creative, like Lava Lantula, where a spider is spewing lava, these are absolutely ridiculous things that just propagate more fear and more hatred for things that are very that are hardly understood. And what's even sadder is that they're hardly understood, but when you do get to sort of spend time with spiders and try to understand what's going on with them, they open up a perspective on the natural world that I can promise you would have never had before. Because something so small that has lived around you all this time is doing these really incredible things, just going about its daily life, but doing these really amazing things like we saw. And we don't tend to notice because of all the stigma that's associated with it, right? So even something, I mean, I know that's the movie poster arachnophobia there, but I mean, from, well, the neurological sciences, which I don't particularly have any remote expertise to comment on, most of the studies sort of center around looking at how people respond to images of spiders versus images of snakes versus an image of a flower or a mushroom, right? So that's how they sort of sense what is a fear and what is not. And while they do say that, hey, when people look at snakes, a picture of a snake or a picture of a spider, they tend to sort of recognize what they're looking at a lot faster. The reaction time, and there's a bunch of other variables that sort of all correlate. Versus when they're looking at a flower or a mushroom, and that sort of sits in its own group. While some of these immediate reactions to stimuli may be there, actually being afraid of them and actually figuring out what to do, like shrieking or looking for a newspaper to whack them, those are all learned behaviors, right? So when you look at somebody else looking at a spider and flipping, over time, as you grow up, that becomes the thing you do when you look at a spider. So it's also interesting because it can be undone. I mean, I was particularly afraid of butterflies, but over time, well, I'm not anymore. It may not be as easy for some other people who genuinely carry these phobias, but for a majority of us, it is just the sort of negative stigma that comes with mainstream media. And so, yeah, on that note, I'd like to end that if you guys can sort of look past all of the negativity that's generally associated with spiders, there's a wonderful world ahead of you. And always, as always, remember, with great power comes great responsibility. And well, yeah, that's about it. If you guys want to know more, or want to follow us, my partner and I work on something called Spiders in the Sea, and you can go look at all the cool stuff that we do on our website.
Thank you so much, sir.
Let me just see. Sorry, I'm looking for the stop sharing button.
Yes, it stopped, I think.
Okay.
So thank you, sir. So now the floor is open for Q&A, but before that, I would like you all to please check your chat box. You will receive a link for our feedback form. Please do fill it up. It will be really helpful for us. So any questions?
Samuel, it was really nice. Thank you. And before selfishly it goes to students, let me ask one question. It's a simple question. Sh should we clean our houses for this spider webs or not?
That's interesting, right? So it's like a very minute version of human wildlife conflict, but we won't even think about it that way. But no, I mean, I'm going to be honest. If there's a lot of cob sort of setting up in my house, I am going to sort of dust it off. There are benefits to having them in some places, because if there are too many mosquitoes, eventually one's going to get caught in those webs. But speaking from a practical position, I guess not everyone's going to be comfortable with leaving a cobweb sort of just draping around the house. If it's in a place where it really doesn't bother you, then it's totally fine. But I mean, I can't really comment on the morality of it, because I definitely get rid of a cobweb now and then.
Okay, thank you. So, yes, students and participants, please ask questions, whatever doubts and queries you have about this different creature, spiders. We always have a very kind of inhibition and fear about this animal, and this is the best opportunity for you to talk it out, clear it out. So, ask questions. Wow, no questions? Not a single question?
Well, that's a first for me, and always happy. Either this has gone incredibly well or not so much.
Let me see. Okay, I think I have muted them by mistake. Yes,
Exactly, we were all muted. So
yeah.
there was nothing, and the chat is disabled, so we can't ask you anything. I was waiting for you to unmute.
Okay.
It was very well explained. I think it's Samuel, right? This is Dr. Seema Singh here, and something very out of the area of my interest, but I'm happy to know more about spiders, and at least I won't feel, negative about them, is all that I want to say. Thank you, Samuel.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Seema. Then you just made my Sunday.
You made ours as well. So thank you.
I have a question. Thanks, ma'am, for joining.
Hello, sir. Hello, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Go ahead.
Yes. Thank you so much, sir. It's a great session. Sir, my question is, how can they share the habitat? Is there any a territorial fight between the same species or different species of spiders?
Excellent question. So what tends to happen is, well, you do have assemblages of different species, right? So around the world, there are well over, I forget the number, 45,000 odd species of spiders around the world. They're bound to share habitats, but they're also micro-habitat specialists. So they tend to sort of stick to a smaller area in which they operate. But like you saw in some of those pictures where there was a spider eating another spider, if they do come across each other, they're going to eat each other. And that's how they sort of, when we talk about them regulating invertebrate populations, that includes the populations of spider assemblages as well. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Just one question, Samuel. This is Dr. Seema again. You were talking about the larvae of the ants being robbed by the spiders. How do you find out all this? It's only through earlier research, or have you also worked on something like that?
So basically, specifically to that example, it was first documented in Australia by a group of researchers who are working on, I mean, a lot of this stems from just sort of natural history observations, right? A very old school method in where you just sort of get lost and stare at things for many, many hours. So in one of those pursuits, basically, in addition to what happened in Australia, when I was working out of the Andamans, I started to notice that there was this one spider that could get incredibly close to weaver ants without getting a negative response from the weaver ants. And when I say negative response, weaver ants are extremely territorial. So when something comes up very close to a nest or a colony, there are very clear signals. They'll open up their mandibles, they'll raise their abdomens and go straight at you after that. And I speak from personal experience as somebody who's intruded on the territory of a weaver ant and, well, got the not so pleasant side of them. But that's the case with other insects, other spiders, and everything else. But I noticed this one tiny, like extremely colorful little guy just going in and out of a weaver ant nest. And so you get curious about, well, how does that work? So then you go and you find that there's existing literature. There have been studies in the Australian university, I forget which one. And so in places like that, in that sort of line of research, they actually went through extensive amounts of trying to understand well how these chemical signatures interact, and they found it to the detail that the spider is mimicking specifically the larvae's chemical signature and not that of any of the other workers. So you can get down to that level of insight, but it all stems from just sort of observing the natural world around you. And so I'm also hoping that the biodiversity cell at Symbiosis ends up contributing to some of these discoveries.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the answer. Thank you.
Yes. Anupama, you can
Yeah.
and ask.
Yes, I have two questions actually.
Sure.
One is about that spider which some signature kind of typical thread it weaves, right?
Do you mean like a very sort of two-dimensional roundish web?
It's a zigzag one.
Sorry?
It's a zigzag one which it weaves.
Oh, right. So it's again a roundish web, but around the spider.
Yeah. In the round web, it weaves like a zigzag thing typically. And what is the use of that? Why it does that?
Very interesting question. So there are a bunch of spiders that do that. That whitish stuff that you see on the web, that's called a stabilimentum.
Okay.
It's another amount. So basically the spider is decorating its web with a bunch of silk. Now, why it does that is still something that's actively being discussed by people who are into that kind of stuff. But some of the general sort of ideas that arise is that for some genera of spiders, what it does is it acts as a sort of defense mechanism. There are a bunch of hypotheses around what it can do as a defense mechanism. ranging from it makes the spider's arms look a little bigger, or if the pattern is a little more complex, it distracts aerial predators like wasps, giving the spider time to escape when there's an aerial attack. There's another line of research for some genera that show that different patterns also create small ultraviolet variations in light that attract insects and
Okay.
actually increase the efficacy of their prey capture.
Maybe the last reason is suitable for where I spotted actually. I spotted it in our building itself in the corner. So it's
Mhm.
kind of outside the building, like balcony. So might be
Oh,
it is for attracting the insects.
yeah.
Okay, and the next question is about the wasp which you have shown in one slide, right?
Hmm.
Which lays its eggs. Let me
Yes.
introduce myself first so that you can explain in my way. I'm a professional engineer, but right now I'm a mother of two boys. So usually we will be like roaming in the garden and finding some creatures to discuss about. So
Oh,
usually
that's
we'll be searching for bugs and spiders, ants, everything, whichever we find.
right.
So one we spotted that signature kind of thread, and the next question is about wasp, which
Mhm.
usually I saw that it will be dragging the jumping spiders.
Oh, right.
So it's always the answer is for laying eggs only. It doesn't eat that spider.
So the picture that you saw was a parasitoid wasp. So
Okay.
those do the egg laying bit. Um, there are some spiders that actively hunt. Sorry, there are some wasps that actively hunt spiders and eat them. So I don't know which one you might have seen, but usually if it's
The same one. The picture is very clear, so I
oh,
spotted the
right.
same wasp.
Yeah, that one's a parasitoid. It typically takes those spiders into a little cave and fills
But
them
that
with eggs.
wasp drags the cockroaches also, I guess. I saw
Yeah,
that also.
yeah. No, excellent observation. No, that's exactly what they do. Wide array of things that get
Okay.
parasitized. Yeah,
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
super. Anybody else?
Snehal, you can unmute yourself and ask questions.
For common name of the spider which we see.
Hello. Is somebody speaking? I can't really
Okay,
hear.
Samuel, one student, Snehal, she is asking, are there any species of spiders got extinct? If any, what is the reason of extinction?
Um, well, I can't really think of any examples, but I'm certain there have been. Um, the other thing to think about, I mean, one example I can give you off the top of my head, I don't think they're particularly extinct already, is something called the booty tarantula. This is a really pretty spider that lives somewhere in central India. Um, I think its now natural range is restricted to some 100 square kilometers where it's supposed to be found. That, for example, is very close to extinction. I mean, I don't think there are too many of them seen around because they were traded as ornamental pets. The reason they're called the Guti sapphire is that they're incredibly beautiful and they're actually in that sapphire color. They're blue and yellow and all of those things. So they got traded to no end. In fact, before I got into spiders and I was still very much a corporate junkie, and I was somewhere in London, I very distinctly remember seeing the Goti tarantula on sale on sites like eBay for like $40, $50 for a spider. So there are many reasons why a spider could go extinct. One are simple consumerist things like pet trade. But if you really want to know what could really affect, well, spiders and really anything in terms of going extinct, I'd say the larger systemic issues like degradation of our environment, um, large tracts of forest land getting converted into mines and sort of random, thoughtless, larger things. That is a very, very long list that I'd rather not get into, because it's Sunday and I want your Sunday evenings to be pleasant. So anything else? I saw Chinmay briefly put his hand up. Thank you, Chinmay, for joining. For those of you who don't know, Chinmay is also a spider enthusiast.
Yes, yes, yes. It's nice to see Chinmay. Yeah.
So there are
Thanks.
a lot of questions in the chat box. One of them is from Shweta Sharma, I guess. She says, "Hello, sir. Recently, there was a news of Australia where spiders created a blanket around the trees. Can you throw some light on it?"
Right. So that, if I understand it correctly, and I will confess that I haven't read enough about it. If I'm not wrong, or if I'm maybe slightly right, basically what happened was one section of, well, there was a part that was starting to get flooded, and some of those spiders came out. There were also hatchlings of other spiders, and basically it was a mass ballooning event where a lot of those spiders traveled from one point to the other. And well, once they landed there, it was just covered with that sort of gossamer of silk. But I'm reasonably sure something that sort of widespread might have some very interesting popular pieces that have been written from the place itself. So they'll probably do a better job of explaining what happened there than me. So sorry if that wasn't a full answer, but yeah, no, I'm very good at dodging these things.
Hi, Samuel.
Hi, Chinmay. How's it going?
Yeah, everything is fine, bro. Do comment about the medically significant species in India also as well. No, it would be helpful.
Sorry?
Medically significant spiders from India.
Oh, you wanted to know the medical significance of
No.
spider?
Medically significant spiders. I meant the venomous groups that are present in India. So it would be helpful for the group.
Oh, sorry, I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Is it so? Like I am talking about the venomous spiders of India, like the medically significant ones.
Oh, the medically significant venomous spiders of India?
Yeah. Like it is better you tell them, like you have the Loxosceles and the widows.
No,
Those two.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I generally avoid the medically significant list for reasons you might understand.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, like Chinmay said, in all fairness, there are some spiders that can, well, have not so pleasant effects on humans, but that number is so small that I would encourage you to go look at spiders and spend time with them before you Google 15 deadliest spiders in the world. But no, absolutely, Chinmay. I think it's good to sort of organically get there once they've started looking at spiders in their balconies.
Yeah. Better they not poke their hands into the webs without knowing the spider. No, that's why.
Definitely. Well, even if the spider is not venomous, guys, do not put your hands in spider webs, because there's a very fundamental thought, right? Think about it. For that number that was published of 7 people being killed in well, a span of 12 years by spiders across the world. Think of how many spiders we've killed in a span of, well, today. Probably more than 7. So when we think of some of these power dynamics and you start to think of, well, spiders potentially harming you, in addition to what Chinmay highlighted in terms of, well, there could be some sort of medical dangers associated with trying to touch those spiders, or accidentally sort of triggering a defense response in them. It's also important not to go and interact with them physically, unless you know what you're doing. And even in that case, you should really ask yourself 10 times if it is necessary for you to handle something, if it's necessary for you to go and sort of, well, put your hands on it. A lot of the magic of spiders and butterflies and leaves and everything, a lot of those stories, nature will tell you if you just sort of sit there and quietly experience it. There's a lot of beauty in that, and you're more likely to see a lot more of it sort of doing its natural thing when you just leave it alone, rather than when you try to pick it up or prod. So you guys have access to this lovely 350-acre property. So whenever you guys do get to go back, I highly encourage you to go spend some time in nature and sort of soak it in.
Sir, I have a question.
Mhm.
So I want to ask, what is so unique about tarantulas? Like, how different are they? I don't have much idea about them.
Well, from a technical aspect, I'd probably hand it over to Chinmay again to tell you about the morphological differences of a tarantula in terms of which way its chelicerae goes and everything else. But from a sort of from a wider perspective, tarantulas tend to be a little, so they're burrowing spiders, right? So they live in the ground. They're very close to, if you remember one of the first slides where we saw that spider from 300 and, well, almost spider from 305 million years ago, the Idmon arachne. So tarantulas are very close to that sort of behavior. They burrow in the ground, they may be burrowing in tree trunks and stuff like that. So as a result, they're really stubby creatures, right? So they tend to have slightly thicker legs, likely to be quite a few of them are quite fuzzy. So there's not, in terms of uniqueness, well, there's a lot that makes each spider unique, right? In terms of the tarantula, I think the most unique thing about it is, well, the burrowing hunters. They're very close to, they're very similar to the things that spiders descend from. And they've also been at the sort of heart of, well, people having a not so popular opinion about spiders. Because it's easy to take something that's a little chubby and furry and turn it around and give it like a monstrous spin. But other than that, well, they're just really friendly creatures like every other spider, and very happy when they're left alone.
Okay, sir. I guess that will be the end of our Q&A round.
Yes, we can take if a quick last one question if anyone has. Otherwise, I think yes, we are at the end of the session. Any question?
Yes, ma'am. One more question. I'm Keshav. Sir, with respect to tarantulas and eternal web spiders, is there temperature is affecting on the reproduction to reproduce whether it's a male or female, as same as in reptiles?
Well, I don't know. The short answer is I do not know if there is a temperature-based determination of gender and how they hatch. I know that's the case in turtles. I don't know about spiders. Is the short answer. But that's a very good question. I'll probably go look it up after this. But as far as I know, I don't think so. But again, I don't know enough on that specific question of their biology to answer.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you for your response.
Okay, I think we are at the end of the session, and to all who are attending, and even for Samuel, let me tell you that our sessions, when we organize it, it is the first session. It's like a base for that particular subject, and that particular expert, he will then the next or following sessions will explore, or in more detail you will understand about that particular species or that genera. So don't go away, means if you have many questions, disappointed, or even I think you should have all those questions in you to for our following sessions, because, and Samuel, we also will invite you for like the next part of this particular whatever syllabus you have put forward in front of us. So this is just an introductory session for spider, you can say. So with this,
Yeah, no, I'd love to interact with you guys. Yeah.
yeah, over to Ahanna for vote of thanks.
So, sir, thank you so much for helping us understand more about another beautiful creature in the ecosystem. I would like to share my takeaway from today's beautiful session. I would like to start by saying that in our day-to-day lives, we usually see spiders on our staircase or our washrooms or in closed areas. But little do we think about how they adapt to the situation, uh, like despite any climate that they are in, any situation they are in. Their ability to change into different forms, as you said, the chemical trickery that they do, which also proves how intelligent creatures they are. Their struggle for existence, how they eat upon other spiders to survive, and also how like they are predators as well as they serve as a prey. And we see spider webs, but we don't really know why the webs are there, what the webs do, what is their function, which we also got to know that the vibrations that they receive on the webs, it helps them to protect themselves from whatever situation that may be arising, that will be arriving for us. And sir, lastly, I would thank you, because I loved how you connected beautifully the nature of spider with the concept of consent, which a lot of us are lacking these days. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you for having me, guys. It was a pleasure interacting with you and some lovely questions as well. And I have some homework to do, so thank you.
Okay.